Okay, so yeah, I'm very, very happy to be here in Sheffield. I gave a talk here quite a few years ago on Pure Land Buddhism. Was anybody here at the time? Yeah, okay, just a few of you. Okay, so I'm not going to give a talk on Pure Land Buddhism this evening, although I am going to draw from one of the Pure Land Sutras, the longest Sukhavati Vyuha Sutra. But before we do that, what I'm going to do this evening is I'm going to give you a context for the Bodhisattva's practice of the paramitars, the mythic, what I call the mythic context, because the whole thing, the Bodhisattva Ideal, the practice of the paramitars, is set within a mythic context rather than a human context. So I'm going to tell you about that. But let's stay with the human for a bit, and let's go right back to the Buddha 2,500 years ago. Where is she? Sachijosi, yeah. Back to the Buddha 2,500 years ago. Very, very simple. A man called Siddhartha left home, practiced under quite a few teachers, and then struck out on his own, determined to gain enlightenment or awakening, Bodhi, and he did it. And the rest of his life he spent walking around India teaching people how they too could do it. Very simple, and many of them did. And when they did, they became enlightened, just the same as the Buddha's enlightenment, no different. But he was called the Buddha, the awakened one, and they reserved that title for him because he did it first. And everyone else who became enlightened, they had the title Arahant. So there we are, there's the Buddha with all his disciples, many of them enlightened. So he's the Buddha and they're Arahants. Very, very simple form of Buddhism. As time went by though, people began to feel that the Buddha was extra special. And therefore that his enlightenment was better than the enlightenment of the people he taught. Yeah? That somehow his enlightenment was somehow beyond the enlightenment of the Arahants. And they began to weave this myth around the Buddha, that it wasn't just a human being who was born, decided to take up the spiritual life, was very, very talented, did it very well and became enlightened. They thought, no, there must be something extra here. So, of course, in the East, they all believe in rebirth. In this country, if you were to ask people at a beginner's class or at a school visit, how many of you believe in rebirth? So let's say 30 people, 2-3 people might put their hands up, rather tentatively, and the rest would not. But I've been told that in the East, if you ask that question, it's the other way around. Everyone puts their hand up. Maybe a few sophisticated Western-style Easterners don't put their hand up, but in the East it's just understood that rebirth is a fact. So this was how it was in India. And so they had this background of this idea of rebirth, and they thought, you know, the Buddha was extra special. He must have come into this world extra special. Must have been all the things he did in his past life. So they then began to weave this myth of a previous Buddha, many millions, trillions of years ago, kalpas ago in fact, untold kalpas ago. A kalpa is a very, very long space of time. It's a kind of mythic amount of time, in fact. So a kalpa, here's how long a kalpa is. You take a rock, a mile cube, right? A mile cube rock. And every 100 years, a goddess floats down from the heavens with a piece of Benares silk in her hand. And it has to be Benares silk, the best silk. And she just wafts this piece of silk over this piece of rock, and then she goes back up to her heaven, and she comes back 100 years and she does it again. How long would it take for that piece of silk, once every 100 years, to wear that rock away to nothing? A kalpa. That's how long a kalpa is. Can you imagine that period of time? No, it's unimaginable. It's achintya, unimaginable. So, uncountable kalpas ago, there was another Buddha called Dipankara. And there he was in his world teaching the Dharma, People were coming to him, learning the Dharma, they were becoming enlightened. But there was one person who was extra special, disciple. And he didn't want to just practice the Dharma and become enlightened. He could have become enlightened in that lifetime, but he thought, no, I want to do what you did, Dipankara, which was to rediscover the Dharma somewhere where it has never been discovered before. I want to become a Buddha, not an Arahant. So then he practiced for all those untold kalpas, the paramitas, all that time, every single lifetime. Uncountable number of lifetimes practicing the paramitas over and over and over again, developing what's called a stock of wisdom and a stock of merit. So brilliant that in his last life, when he gained enlightenment, he was a Buddha. Yeah, and it is rather remarkable, isn't it? Here we are 2,500 years ago in Sheffield, and there's all these people here who are practicing this man's teaching, who lived in India 2,500 years ago. So that's the background. Now let's go, and then actually I'll just tell you a bit more about this. So then you've got one Buddha in the past called Dipankara, and then they had another one. Well, he must have done the same. So you go back another few kalpas to another Buddha, and so on, and you get 7 Buddhas in the past, and then you get 14 Buddhas in the past. And it goes on like this. So you've got all these Buddhas in the past. But then they began to think, there's time, but there's also space, isn't there? And maybe there are Buddhas all over space, in different universes, in different galaxies. There are Buddhas with their own followings and so on. And so you get this idea of time and space expanding out from the human size to the cosmic size. So now you get this idea of all these Buddhas in the past, and there are going to be Buddhas in the future. There is going to be a Buddha in the future, isn't there? We know who it's going to be. Maitreya, the friendly one, he's going to be the next Buddha, but that's kalpas away, kalpas in the future. And you can't imagine how long in the future that will be. So now you get all these Buddhas in the past, there are going to be Buddhas in the future, and there are Buddhas right now all over the universe, in different galaxies, teaching the Dharma. And what they've done is they've developed their own what's called a Buddha field. Some of you have heard of this word, Buddha field. Buddha kshetra. A field not in the sense of field, like a physical field, but more like an electrical field, a kind of vast area where the Buddha has his influence. And to become a Buddha, you need to become a Bodhisattva. And to become a Bodhisattva, you need to take the Bodhisattva vow, the pranidhana. You need to vow that you will practice for innumerable lifetimes in the future and then develop your own Buddha field and become a Buddha and start teaching in a place where nobody's ever heard of Buddhism before. That's the mythic context of the paramitas. So what a bodhisattva is someone who wants to become a Buddha and is practicing the paramitas in order to do that over innumerable lifetimes. That's the mythic context. You might ask, why? Why bother to think like that? Isn't it enough to just be a human being practicing the Dharma to gain enlightenment? Isn't that enough? And that's enough for many, many people. And in a way, there's no problem with that. No, there's no problem. But the Mahayana, they wanted to make the whole thing really cosmic. And so you might ask, what's the point of that cosmic kind of myth around the practice? The text that I'm going to look at this evening, the Sukhavati Vyuha Sutra, or a little bit of that text, a tiny little bit of that text. In the book that I've just written about these sutras, what I say very often in the book is, with these sutras, they're imaginative texts. They're not doctrinal treatises or philosophical treatises. They're imaginative. So the question we must ask them, when one of these texts tells us something, the question is not, is this true or not? Yeah, that isn't the question we should be asking the texts. They don't deal in that kind of truth. The question we should be asking of them is, would it help me to imagine this? Yeah, it's a very different question, isn't it? What effect might it have on me to imagine this? So let's ask that question now of this idea of cosmic Buddhas. Buddhas all over the place, all over the universe. Buddhas of the past. And we are not just practicing in this one lifetime to become better human beings, possibly enlightened. This is just one lifetime among innumerable number of lifetimes where we're just practicing. And we'll carry on practicing for innumerable lifetimes. What benefit might that be to us to think like that? That's the question. And I'm not going to answer that question for you. Something you can do in your study groups later. Of what benefit might it be to us to imagine ourselves living the spiritual life in this cosmic context? So, I mentioned Buddha fields. I'm just going to say a bit more about Buddha fields. According to the Mahayana doctrine, there are two kinds of Buddha fields. There are pure Buddha fields and impure Buddha fields. Let's begin with impure Buddha fields because we're in one now. We live in an impure Buddha field. The good news is it's a Buddha field. There is a Buddha here in this world. And we're practicing his teachings and we can become enlightened if we really make the effort to do that. So that's all good news. The bad news, it's an impure Buddha field. And what makes an impure Buddha field impure is the fact that suffering exists in this world. And you know that, don't you? You know that suffering exists in this world because you all suffer, just as I do. And we know that beings all over the world suffer. Many of them suffer much more than we do. You just have to watch the news or listen to the news, read the newspaper, and you know immediately that people are suffering almost unimaginably in this world. That's what the world is like. So therefore, it's an impure Buddha field. A pure Buddha field is a world where there's no suffering. There are no hellish states of mind. There are no animal-like states of mind. There's no jealousy. There's no aggression. The beings in a pure Buddha field just practice the Dharma and get on really well together, and it's just fantastic. Fairy tale land, isn't it? Interestingly, when I was writing this book, which is about a pure Buddha field, a particular pure Buddha field, and faith is a big element in this and these texts, I thought I'd just look up faith in the dictionary. And do you know what the word just in front of faith is in the dictionary? Fairy tale. It's the kind of thing that militant atheists would really relish, isn't it? You see, faith is just a fairy tale. And it is rather fairy tale-like, but again, the texts aren't telling us the truth, yeah? That's not their purpose. They're giving us an imaginative picture. And the question is not, is this true? The question is, what benefit might we gain from imagining this? And I want you to bear that in mind as I go through the talk. So, in these sutras, in these three sutras, well, I'm just going to talk about one of them, called the longer Sukhavati Vyuha Sutra. And in that, it gives the mythic history of this pure land called Sukhavati. Sukhavati means the land of utmost bliss. And it's the pure land of Amitabha. How many of you have heard of Amitabha? Yeah, so you all know Amitabha. This is his pure land, Sukhavati, that I'm going to talk about. And it gives a mythic history of how Amitabha became the Buddha, Amitabha, and how he developed his pure land, Sukhavati. So we go way back, untold number of kalpas in the past, where there was a Buddha called Lokeshvara Raja. And he had a disciple called Dharmakara. And Dharmakara was a king, but he left his kingdom and he became a monk and he practiced under Lokeshvara Raja. And one day he took the Bodhisattva vow. Yeah, he decided to take the Bodhisattva vow. So he went to Lokeshvara Raja and he said, I want to take the Bodhisattva vow. And what I want to do is, before I take it, I want you to show me all the pure Buddha fields in the whole universe. I want to see them all, because what I want to do is survey them all and then take all the best bits of all the different Pure Lands and make the best Pure Land in the whole universe. It's really fairy tale-like, isn't it? So, the Buddha showed him, and it took him a long time to show him. It took him 5 kalpas to show him all the Buddha fields in all the different parts of the universe. There's a joke in the sutra. We often miss jokes in Buddhist texts because we're not expecting them. We don't expect there to be a joke. I remember reading an Ian McEwan novel some time ago, Solar. And I like Ian McEwan because he's a kind of serious writer. And after about a third of the way through, this is a silly book. This is a really silly book. And then I read in the newspaper that it was a comedy. Because I wasn't expecting it to be a comedy because it's Ian McEwan. I just thought, this is really silly, he's gone crazy. And then I thought, oh, it's meant to be funny. So in these texts, sometimes there's a joke and it just goes way over our head because we're not expecting there to be a joke in a Buddhist text. But there is a joke. And the joke is this. The Buddha's telling Ananda about what I've just told you. The story I've just told you. And he said, so he showed Dharmakara all these Buddha fields, and it lasted 5 kalpas. So Ananda then says, how long did people live in those days? That's the joke. And they lived for 40 kalpas. Yeah, they lived for 40 kalpas. Now, that's interesting, isn't it? Yeah. So, let's say we live about 80 years. People in this country, usually the average length of time for living in this country is 81 years. So let's say 80 years. So that would be equivalent of about 10 years of our lifetime, just contemplating Buddha fields, before you do anything else. And then, Dharmakara, after that, he then contemplated, he meditated on Buddha fields for another 5 kalpas. So all that before he did anything else. And then he made his vows, he made the Bodhisattva vow. In fact, he made loads of vows, depending on which version of the sutra you've got. It could be 46, 47 or 48, there are different numbers. But he made lots of vows, but in effect what he vowed was that he would practice over innumerable lifetimes and create this fantastic world system called Sukhavati for the benefit of all beings. That's basically the vow that he took. And now I wanted to tell you what happened next, because then he practiced the paramitas lifetime after lifetime after lifetime. There's just a couple of pages where the Buddha describes his practice of the paramitas, and that's what I'm going to talk about this evening. I read recently Sangharakshita, our teacher, and I can't remember whether it was in the Survey of Buddhism or the Eternal Legacy. But he was talking about this bit of the text, and he said, and then there's a charming description of the Bodhisattva life. And for me, that was slightly damning it with faint praise, calling it a charming description, because I think it's more than that. I think there's a lot in this. There's quite a lot of study material here. It's a really lovely little bit of text. Basically, it's describing this mythical figure called Dharmakara, this Bodhisattva, how he lived. And it's absolutely gorgeous. I'm going to read you a bit of it in a moment. For me, how many of you have heard of a practice called the recollection of the Buddha, Buddhanusati? Well, what you do is you recollect all the Buddha's qualities, and there's a list of them. And you recollect all those qualities. And by recollecting them, you begin to imbibe them into yourself. And this is what I think of as a Bodhisattva Anusati. Bodhisattva Anusati. You're recollecting the Bodhisattva's way of life. Let me read you a little bit of it. One of the things I argue in the book that I've just written about these texts is their practices in themselves. They're meant to be read or listened to. You don't have to do anything more with them. Often Buddhist texts, the point of them is you read them or you discuss them, and then you go and try and put into practice what you've just read or heard, you try and do that. You don't have to do that with these texts, yeah? You just have to let them affect you. That is the practice. That's all you need to do. You don't have to go away, you don't have to take notes and go away and do it. You just have to listen to the text over and over again. Really important Mahayana practice. One of the most important Mahayana practices in the East. It's funny how in this country, in the West generally, we think of Buddhism, not only in our movement, many other Western Buddhist movements as well. We think of Buddhism being about study of the texts and meditation, and hopefully ethical practice as well. We think in those kind of terms, but in the East, they don't really think like that at all. Textual, just listening to texts and letting them affect you is a very big aspect of practice. So let's do a bit of practice now, yeah? So this is like a meditation, yeah? Just going to read you one. It's as if it was a beginner's class. I was just going to do 5 minutes mindfulness of breathing with you and then ask you what it was like. So it's a bit like this. I'm going to do a 5-minute Mahayana practice of sutra recitation, yeah? So here we go. He was youthful, charming, gentle, happy, patient, and well loved. He was easy to support and didn't want much. He was easily satisfied and fond of solitude. He was uncorrupted, clear-minded, reliable, straightforward, honest, and not deceitful. He was open-hearted and spoke with affection. He was unwaveringly committed to striving to develop positive qualities. He had laid down his burden. He had fulfilled his great vow for the benefit of all living beings. He revered the Buddha, the Dharma, the Sangha, his teachers, his preceptors, and his spiritual friends. He was sincere in his practice of the Bodhisattva path. He was kind, truthful, and humble, and possessed many other good qualities besides. He encouraged others to develop all kinds of positive qualities. He dwelt in the state of emptiness, the state of freedom from causes, the state of freedom from desire, the state of freedom from accomplishment, and the state of non-arising. Okay, ding, ring the bell for the end. And I must immediately apologise because I meant to say she sometimes as well, and I completely forgot. So let me just read a little bit of that in she, under she. She was unwaveringly committed to striving to develop positive qualities. She had laid down her burden. She had fulfilled her great vow for the benefit of all living beings. Makes a difference, doesn't it? Yeah. To hear it in she, yeah. So, that's just a little bit of the description of this bodhisattva, this mythical bodhisattva called Dharmakara. And the idea is that you don't have to do anything more with that now, but you just imbibe those qualities. You're just hearing words like generous, open-hearted, has an effect on us, doesn't it? That's how the practice works. You just let those qualities affect you and you just imbibe them without having to make very much effort. It's really good news, isn't it? Now, what I want to say is that, because coming back to the Paramitars, I'm going to talk about the Paramitars soon, but before I do that, it's very interesting that what the text says is after Dharmakara had made his vows, it says this, then Ananda, the Buddha speaking to Ananda, he says, then Ananda, when the monk Dharmakara had proclaimed these unique vows of his own before the Blessed One, Lokeshvara Raja, the Buddha, he stood firmly in his resolution to do as he had promised. That's interesting, isn't it? He made a vow, and he stood firmly in that vow. He'd made a promise, and he was going to keep it. Last year I was here, and there were for an order event, and 3 order members gave talks, and one of them was Archer. How many of you know Archer? The thing that really impressed me about that talk was one thing he said, which was he made a vow some time ago to never make a promise that he couldn't keep. That's really impressive, isn't it? Really impressive. Never make a promise that you cannot keep. So that's what Dharmakara did. And then it says, while he was perfecting the complete purity, the greatness and the excellence of his Buddha field, and while he was practicing the Bodhisattva path for innumerably, inestimably, inconceivably, this is another bit of Mahayana humour here, I think, incomparably, immeasurably, incalculably, indescribably, many, countless hundreds of thousands of millions of years, he did not waver towards sensual desire, ill will, or cruelty. Yeah? And a little bit later on it says he practiced awareness, and when he entered a village, a city, a town, a country, a kingdom, or a royal palace, he remained composed, unaffected by forms, sounds, smells, tastes, physical objects, or mental objects. Yeah? In other words, he was looking after his mind. Yeah, he was working on his mind. He was working on his inner life, his introversion. Yeah, just like we do when we meditate. We're working on our inner life, aren't we? But as well as that, you may have noticed in the longer section I read to you a little while ago, he encouraged others to develop all kinds of positive qualities. Yeah. So his practice was twofold. He worked on himself and he worked with others. He worked on the world out there. And it's very explicit. It's very explicit about this. He was careful about what he said. In his practice of the path of the Bodhisattva, he gave up speaking in ways which created ill will in himself. Oops, sorry, did it. He asked me not to do that, and I did it. He gave up speaking in ways which created ill will in himself and others. Instead, he spoke in ways which brought benefit and happiness to himself and others. By practicing the path of the Bodhisattva, he led, here we go again, immeasurably many, innumerable, countless, hundreds of thousands of millions of living beings to unsurpassed, perfect awakening. So many that it is not easy to express their number in words. Now, there's a very interesting and important point made here. So this is his practice where he's working with others. He's not just working on himself, he's helping others, encouraging others to practice. Don't know if you noticed there, Dharmakara is not a Buddha at this moment. He's a Bodhisattva. He's not enlightened. But by practicing the path of the Bodhisattva, he led immeasurably many, etc., 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 thousands of millions of beings to unsurpassed perfect awakening. Do you get the significance of that? Some of you are looking interested and some of you are looking blank, like, yeah. The point here is that he's not enlightened, but he's helping other people to become enlightened. This is really great, isn't it? Very often people, I think it's a kind of truism that we just go along with, that only an enlightened being can help other people become enlightened. You can only teach people up to where you're up to. But here, the text makes it clear that it doesn't matter where you're at. You get someone else, the disciple can outstrip the teacher. Yeah? You just teach, it's the Dharma, it's not you. It's not your clever a way of going about things. You're just passing something on, aren't you, to someone else? Yeah? And they make of it what they will. And they can overtake you in their spiritual development. You know, you're still practicing away and teaching as a mere bodhisattva. And all these innumerable, uncountable millions and trillions of beings are becoming awakened, fully awakened around you. That's really great, isn't it? It's really good to know. It really takes the pressure off us teachers. Because very often, you know, you kind of feel sometimes, oh, I'm getting nowhere. Who am I to teach? Well, it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. We need to teach the Dharma and people will take it. They'll take it and run with it. Really good to know that. Now then, it's time, I think, I came to the Paramitas. And in this text, this is one of the early Mahayana texts. And it doesn't have 10 Paramitas, it has 6. It has only 6 Paramitas. It's later that they extended it to 10. The Mahayana Buddhists extended it to 10 Paramitas. So here it's 6 Paramitas. In his practice of the path of the Bodhisattva, he encouraged others to practice the perfection of generosity, just as he did himself. He encouraged others to practice the perfections of ethical conduct, patient acceptance, energy, meditation and wisdom. That's all 6 Paramitas now. Just as he did himself. Yeah. So this is the point, this is the main point I want to make this evening, which is here, the text doesn't just say he practiced the Paramitas himself, he did, but he also encouraged others to practice them. And this idea goes right back to the Buddha. So we're going to go right back to the Buddha, back to human Buddhism. And we're going to go back to one of his disciples called Mahayana. Now, if you're of a studious bent, one thing you could do, which would bring a lot of fruit about, I think, is go back to the Pali Canon and find as many instances as you can of this man Mahayana, because he asks some great questions. I often think that I'm going to do that one day, and I haven't, but what I want to do one day is find out all those things and bring it all together. It'll be a fabulous talk, just to talk about Mahayana and his questions. And here he is asking some really great questions. He says, "Venerable Sir, in what way is one a lay follower?" Yeah, important question, isn't it? Because it looks like we're all lay folk. There's no monks or nuns here. So we're lay followers. So he's asked, in what way is one a lay follower? And the Buddha says, inasmuch as one has gone for refuge to the Buddha, to the Dharma, to the Sangha, in that way, Mahayana, one is a lay follower. That's what makes us lay Buddhists. Yeah, it's what makes us Buddhists, in fact, isn't it? Going for refuge to the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. But he doesn't leave it there. Then, Venerable Sir, in what way is a lay follower virtuous? And then the Buddha talks about the 5 precepts. He says, if you practice the 5 precepts, you are a virtuous lay follower. So there we've got going for refuge followed by the precepts. How many of you chant the refuges and precepts? That's it. That's why we do it, because that's what makes us Buddhists and what makes us virtuous. He asks another question. Then, Venerable Sir, in what way is a lay follower engaged in his own welfare, but not in others' welfare? Long answer, but I'm just going to read you a little bit of the answer. Mahayana, inasmuch as a lay follower is possessed of faith himself, but rouses not others to possess faith, is possessed of virtue himself, but rouses not others to possess virtue. That's a little bit Shakespearean the way that's put, isn't it? Is possessed of generosity himself, but rouses not others to possess generosity. And then I'll skip the next bit and go to the end. Having known the Dharma, is himself committed to the practice according to the Dharma, but rouses not others to be committed to practice according to the Dharma. In that way, Mahayana is a lay follower engaged in his own welfare, but not in others' welfare. No value judgment intended there. But that's just one way of practicing. You just practice for yourself. Mahayana doesn't leave it there. He says, then, Venerable Sir, in what way is a lay follower engaging in his own welfare and in others' welfare? The answer, Mahayana, inasmuch as a lay follower is possessed of faith himself and rouses others to possess faith, is possessed of virtue himself and rouses others to possess virtue, is possessed of generosity himself and rouses others to possess generosity, is himself or herself committed to the practice according to the Dharma and rouses others to be committed to the practice according to the Dharma. In that way, Mahayana, a lay follower, is engaged in his own welfare or her own welfare and in others' welfare. That's an important little text, isn't it? Really great little text. The Buddha doesn't say that's much better to do that last one than it is to do the earlier one. But it's kind of leading us that way, isn't it? He doesn't say in so many words, but you get the impression that if you could do both, why wouldn't you? Yeah? Let's do both. Let's practice ourselves, but also encourage, rouse others to practice. Yeah. It's important, though, that we ourselves practice. It's no good going around and rousing and encouraging other people to do all these things and you're not doing any of it. It becomes very hollow, doesn't it? So in both this text and going back to the Sukhavi Vyuha Sutra, in that text too, Dharmakara practiced the 6 perfections himself as well as encouraged others to practice them. Yeah. So this is what, who was it a couple of weeks ago talking about generosity? Maitri Sara, was it?
Maitri Dasa.
Maitri
Dasa.
Maitri Dasa.
Dasa.
Is that a man or a woman?
Gentleman. Man, gentleman. Gentleman.
It's a man.
It's a man. Yeah, so he was, hopefully, he practiced generosity himself, but he was encouraging you all, I'm sure, to practice generosity. So that's part of the Bodhisattva path, not only to practice yourself, but also to encourage, teach, help other people to practice what you're practicing too. So that's one of my big points. Final big point that I want to make, because it's 8:15, is this. When I can find it. Maybe it's over the page. He did so many skillful things like this whilst practicing the path of the Bodhisattva for innumerably, uncountably, inconceivably, incomparably, immeasurably, indescribably many countless hundreds of thousands of eons. Has to be funny, doesn't it? Yeah. You know, anyway. So many eons practicing, that he breathed a heavenly scent of sandalwood when he exhaled. More exquisite than the perfumes of the gods. It's interesting, isn't it? We're in mythic land here, yeah? Nothing means what it seems to say, yeah? Remember, this isn't telling us factual truth. The question is, what benefit might we gain from imagining this? Yeah? That's the thing. Next, from his pores came the fragrance of blue lotuses. Because he was adorned with both the major and minor physical characteristics of a great being, everyone found him to be handsome, gracious, and beautiful, exquisitely, supremely delightful in appearance. Now you might think, that's a bit sexist and ageist, isn't it? But actually, again, we're not talking physical beauty here. In my book, The Art of Reflection, I talk about a visit to Dublin. And I went to the Dublin Art Gallery, and then when I go to art galleries, I like to find the art of that country if I can, and there's a wonderful Irish section in there. And there's a painting of a very old woman. It's called The Fisherman's Mother. Very old, like really craggy face. And she's sitting there looking up a bit like this, a bit bent over like this. And she's got her hands on a walking stick. And from her hands is a rosary coming down like this. And she's got this dark blue kind of robe and a dark blue thing over her head, really grey hair. And she's looking up like this, and she's utterly beautiful. Utterly, beauty just shines out of this very, very old woman. So we're not talking about physical beauty here, we're talking about spiritual beauty. He produced all kinds of ornaments made of precious jewels, all kinds of clothes and robes, all kinds of flowers, incense, perfumes, garlands, ointments, parasols, banners and flags, and all kinds of music and song. These things arose from the palms of his hands and from every pore in his body. He produced all kinds of food and drink, which was delicious to eat and exquisite to imbibe, as well as all kinds of other enjoyable, delightful things which flowed forth from the palms of his hands as he manifested them. In this way, Ananda, the monk Dharmakara practiced the path of the Bodhisattva in full possession of all the tools and all the forms of mastery of a Bodhisattva. This is remarkable. The text is basically saying that when you practice, you produce beauty. Beauty begins to flow from you. Not physical beauty in the way that we're so used to seeing in the newspapers and on the telly and so on. Not that kind of youth beauty, but real beauty, spiritual beauty. We begin to scatter beauty and riches all over the place. This is what the Bodhisattva Ideal is really about. This is what Buddhist practice is really about. Becoming beautiful and then sharing that beauty all over. So the idea here is, in the text, is that the spiritual life is a beautiful life. It's beautiful. And that's why we make our centres as beautiful as we possibly can, and the garden outside the centre. Because beauty is so important for the spiritual life. And do you know what Sukhavati is made of? Yeah. Anybody who's heard the text or read them, you'll know what it's made of. The ground is golden. The trees are made of gold, silver, lapis lazuli. You know what lapis lazuli is now, which is a bit like turquoise, coral, crystal, sapphire, ruby, emerald. Trees are made of all these things. There are ponds with lotuses in, fantastic, wonderful lotuses, and the sand of the pond, we say golden sand, don't we? Meaning sand which looks a bit like gold in the sunshine. No, here, it's real gold sand. And everything is unutterably beautiful. It's jewels and wonderful things everywhere. How did that come about? That's because Dharmakara practiced for innumerable, uncountable, etc., aeons. Practicing, scattering his beauty everywhere until he made a whole world which was beautiful. And that's what we're doing, isn't it? That's what Buddhist centres do. I mean, there's the kind of human way of looking at it. What we're doing is we're putting on classes for people to learn about the Dharma, and etc. But actually, the mythic way of understanding Buddhist centres, including this one, is that we're making the world more beautiful. Yeah. And we're scattering beauty all over and encouraging others to come and learn how they too can become unutterably beautiful, just like the fisherman's mother. And it's 8:20, so I'm going to end there.